All right, so today we're going to talk about three things that are unseen struggles that welders may have and that you may struggle with, and maybe some ideas that you can use to help overcome those. Keegan, let's talk about the focus of the welder. I know in my past history, looking at something the size of a pencil eraser for 8 to 10, maybe 16 hours a day can sometimes be mind-blowing. So what are some of the ways that you've overcome focusing and keeping your focus on the job in hand?
Well, your first couple of years when you're welding, you will have to really focus in on that puddle for long periods of time. But then after a couple of years of welding, you'll be able to do several things while you're welding. So you'll be able to think about what you're doing next and what you're going to do, where you're placing your wire, where you're going to be doing your next fill pass. So while you're welding, you'll be able to think about what's next in the process. And that really translates over to a lot of different things in life as well. You know, instead of just focusing in on the sole thing that you're doing, you need to also be thinking about what's next in your step. And that's really helpful, you know, in today's world, because I feel like a lot of welders and people really aren't thinking about the next thing. So, you know, as you're welding, maybe start to think about what's next, and then that'll translate over into your regular life.
Right. So, you know, when I fire up that bead, I want to know where that's going to end at, because I don't want to have all those stops and starts ending at the same place. I want to be able to stagger those. So sometimes you may have to burn on, 3/4 of a rod and then pick that one up later. You know, if you focus on where's the next weld going to go, how is it going to affect my fill pass? How are these fill passes going to affect my final cap? You know, if you're slow coming off the bottom of that light, then are you going to have too much reinforcement when you get ready to cap it?
Right. And a lot of welders, a lot of younger welders, they put themselves in binds a lot of the time. So myself, for example, there was a couple times I'd be up in the pipe rack and I'd start the root in the wrong spot. And then I would have to make a tie-in where there's other pipes and whatnot. So as you get farther into the welding journey, you'll start to learn, where to start and where to finish welds, so you don't put yourself in those bad situations. So,
one thing I think that can help some young welders overcome, if you're running a rod you have to manipulate like a 60-10, is getting a countdown, because you need to do the same thing every single time so each puddle is stacked up at the same distance. So if you're coming out of the puddle 1/8 of an inch now and 1/4 of an inch to the next one and 3/16 of an inch later, you're going to have this really inconsistent, unquality pattern. But if you can get a sort of countdown to yourself, whether it's a 1-2 or a 1-2-3 or a 1-2 hold it or whatever works for you, and some people like to time that into the rhythm of a song and maybe hum that song. But eventually, as you're focusing on the puddle, you'll get some hand-eye coordination and some muscle memory so that you can produce those quality welds and be able to focus on what's next in your life.
Right, and then you don't have to think about it anymore. And going back to what we were saying, you can make a full weld in 10 hours and not even be thinking about the weld whenever you're doing it, but it'll shoot and pass x-ray every time. So that's why it's really fun to have a buddy welder. If you've been welding for 5 years and the guy on the other side of the pipe's been welding for 5 years, you all can just have a conversation the whole time you're welding and talk and laugh, listen to music and make the weld, and it'd be totally fine. So
Sure.
That's the cool thing about, if you put the time into focusing and understanding, what needs to happen at what point in the weld, then you can really focus on a lot of other things as well while you're welding.
So how do you overcome some of those mental barriers? So maybe you are welding with the buddy and everything's been going good, and all of a sudden there's some sort of mental barrier because something didn't go your way. Give us an example of one of those items.
So, a mental barrier is really, in welding, anything that throws you off pretty far. So one of the big things is bad shots. Now, a lot of times as a younger welder, you'll get bad shots, maybe once a job, maybe once a year. But after about 5 years welding to 10 years welding, you really get good experience, with not having bad shots. You can go years or maybe even 5 years without bad shots, but you won't go your whole career without bad shots. It's like I've had people tell me they've made their whole career without bad shots, and I just don't believe that. I think, that either they're lying or they weren't having their weld shot. But one of the biggest mental barriers that I've seen is when you get guys that have been welding for more than 5 years and they go to a job and the company that they're working for has political differences with the x-ray company or the plant. So there's a lot of headbutting sometimes with companies and plants, and the x-ray techs or the testing companies will give your company a really hard time. So this last job I was on in Montana, our company was having a really hard time with x-rays and phase arrays because the testing company didn't like ours. And so there were guys that had been welding for 10, 20 years, and they were getting 3, 4 bad shots a night. And, you know, I had a couple bad shots, and a couple buddies of mine had a lot of bad shots, and it really threw some people off. It threw me off a little bit, but you just got to keep in your head, you know, sometimes it's not always you. You can make a perfect weld, and that x-ray company is going to call it a bad weld just for whatever reason, money, political differences. And so you really got to let that go past you and understand that it's not you most of the time. It's the companies that's testing your welds or some other reason that, you know, you can't, that's not you.
How do you keep from becoming disconnected? So in other words, maybe you're disconnected from your family because you're a long distance away, or maybe you're disconnected from reality because, hey, you own so many toys, you have to work. You don't get any time off. What keeps you from becoming disconnected?
Well, I think that comes back to setting yourself up right. You know, whenever you start out in the welding industry, you don't want to get all these toys and then you have a bunch of bills and you have to stay welding all the time. And for me, I've set myself up to where I don't have to work 24/7. So what keeps me, you know, connected at all times is not working all the time. So I will take, you know, months off at a time to just kind of relax and refocus and get connected with my family or friends. Or, you know, sometimes you do need a break from welding. If you're doing it all the time, you're going to get burnout. You're not going to enjoy it. And I feel like that's why a lot of people in the industry just don't like welding, because they have to do it 24/7 because of their bills or bad decisions they've made. So if you can figure out a way to, you know, knock down your time working, then I think it's more enjoyable, and that's what I do.
Right. I know a buddy who's fell into that typical stereotype of a welder. He's got a big fancy jacked up truck. He's got a little tiny sports car. He's got a street bike. He's got an ATV. They got a camper. They got a boat. He's got 2 garages full of toys, but he's got no time to use them.
Right.
Because when the job is over, he's got to go looking for the next job because he got so many payments. So, you know, you can get disconnected from reality because you're basically married to the loan officer at the bank. You got to make sure that doesn't happen.
Right. And a lot of times your reality just becomes the welding job. So there's a lot of guys that I know that have to stay in it because of bills or bad decisions. And I mean, welding is their life. Like being in a plant they're in the plants more than they're at their own home. So, you know, I didn't want that to go down that route, and I've seen a lot of people go down that route. And if you want to stay connected in the welding industry and with your life, you just got to take breaks.
Right. So hopefully these things are going to be topics that you're interested in and help you out so you can maintain quality focus, you can avoid those mental barriers, and don't get disconnected from your family while you're out there working.
So hopefully you guys like this video. We'll be putting out more videos on our YouTube channel, so subscribe to that. And also check out our website. We have links, and we also have shop for clothing and a virtual tour. Until next time, see you there.